The department bonus made me a hospital-wide joke. As the top surgeon at Metropolitan General, the guy they called the Golden Hands, I performed 240 high-difficulty operations a year. My bonus was $2 for 100. That's $10 a surgery. Meanwhile, our department head, a man who hadn't scrubbed in for years, took home $1. $2 million. I had to laugh. So at the department's annual meeting, I made an announcement. Starting today, I'm done with the grind. I'm punching the clock at 5 p.m. sharp and getting a life. The chief's face went pale, but he didn't really panic until the next day, when a VIP patient with friends in high places specifically requested me, and only me, for their surgery. 01 The air in the conference room for the annual department review was thick and suffocating, like a pot of stale chili. It was a miserable cocktail of antiseptic, cheap cologne, and the general scent of burnout ambition. Dr. Warren Vance, the head of general surgery, stood in front of the projector screen. His bulky frame was stuffed into a suit a size too small, making him look like a sausage about to burst its casing. He was spitting flecks of saliva as he rambled on about the department's glorious achievements this year. Folks, under the brilliant guidance of hospital leadership, and thanks to the tireless efforts of every single person in this room, our department's surgical volume has once again hit a record high. His voice was greasy and loud, bouncing off the soundproofed walls. I sat silently in the corner, the gold rims of my glasses forming a neat barrier between me and the farce unfolding. The PowerPoint slide clicked forward, and a set of jarring numbers filled the screen. Total surgeries, over 500, of which level 4 high-complexity procedures, over 260. Vance used a red laser pointer to circle the number 260 again and again, as if it were a monument he'd personally carved from stone. The data chart right behind him clearly noted that more than half of those, 240, to be exact, had me Dr. Leo Forrest listed as the lead surgeon. A smattering of half-hearted applause broke out, followed by a wave of whispers. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, like spotlights, a mix of scrutiny and raw envy. Vance soaked it in, clearing his throat before changing his tone. The hospital and the department see your hard work. We see the sacrifices you've made. He paused for dramatic effect. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to announce this year's performance bonuses. He drew out the words like a bad game show host. To ensure complete transparency, we've asked Sarah from accounting to read the list aloud. A young woman in dark-rimmed glasses stood up, clutching a single sheet of paper that suddenly seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Vance added, almost as an afterthought, read it from highest to lowest. The air in the room froze. This wasn't a celebration. It was a meticulously planned public execution. Dr. Warren Vance, department head. Composite contribution score, 98. Annual bonus, $1,200,000. Sarah's voice trembled slightly. $1. $2 million. The number detonated in the silent room. After a split second of stunned silence, a roar of applause erupted. The sycophants who orbited Vance, the associate chiefs, his inner circle, led the charge, their faces twisted into grotesque smiles, as if they were all getting a cut. Vance waved his hand with faux modesty, the fat on his cheeks jiggling with glee. A department head who never stepped into or who had to call on a second-year resident to handle a simple appendectomy, just pocketed over $1 million. It was absurd. It was reality. Dr. Kyle Burton, attending physician. Composite score, 85. Annual bonus, $450,000. Burton was Vance's #1 yes man. He stood up, gave a smug little nod to the room, his pride practically radiating off him. Another round of applause. The next few names were all from Vance's clique. Not a single one received less than 200 grand. They were carving up the department's profits, licking the grease from their fingers. An icy coldness spread through my chest. I felt like I'd been thrown onto a frozen lake in the middle of winter. I already knew how this was going to end for me. Sure enough, after a series of six-figure bombshells, the atmosphere hit a fever pitch. Sarah from accounting paused. Her eyes deliberately avoided mine, and her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. Dr. Leo Forrest, attending physician, lead surgeon on 240 high-complexity procedures. Bonus. She stopped, as if she couldn't bring herself to say the number. Vance, growing impatient, leaned into the microphone. Speak up, Sarah. Let's let Dr. Forrest have his moment too. Bonus, $2,000 for $100. $2, 400. 240 complex, life or death surgeries. That's $10 apiece. You couldn't even buy a decent bottle of bourbon for $10. The room went dead silent. It was a silence louder and more piercing than any noise. This time, every single gaze in the room locked onto me. I could feel the pity, the mockery, the contempt. It was 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin. I heard someone trying to stifle a laugh, their shoulders shaking. I was the biggest joke in the hospital. Chloe Davis, the resident sitting next to me, was shaking with rage, her face flushed crimson. She shot up from her chair, but I grabbed her wrist and pulled her back down. I shook my head, a silent command to stay put. Arguing here would only make me look more pathetic. Vance, ever the magnanimous leader, took the microphone to deliver his pre-rehearsed justification. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. The department's bonus structure was decided by a committee. This formula is based on composite contribution, not just surgical volume, he said, emphasizing the word. Dr. Forrest's technical skills are excellent. We all acknowledge that. However, there is significant room for improvement when it comes to teamwork, departmental citizenship, and interpersonal skills. Lack soft skills. Low team contribution score. The official verdict was in, silencing any potential dissent. What a joke. My mind flashed with a montage of the past year. Standing for 16 hours straight to resect a rare tumor, only to collapse from exhaustion the moment I stepped out of the OR. Promising my dad I'd be home for his birthday, then listening to my mom cry on the phone as I spent the night saving a car crash victim. Missing every single one of my daughter's parent-teacher conferences. In her drawing of our family, I was always a faceless figure in scrubs, my back turned. All those sleepless nights, all the sacrifices, all the moments I'd stolen from my family, all of that life I'd poured into being technically excellent was worth $2 for $100, and a lecture about not being a team player. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a sarcastic one, a genuine, from-the-gut laugh. In the tomb-like silence of the conference room, my laughter echoed, sharp and out of place. Vance's face darkened. Leo, what's so funny? Do you have a problem with the committee's decision? Everyone stared, waiting for the explosion. Would I yell? Argue? Or just swallow the humiliation? Just as Vance was about to dismiss the meeting, I stood up. I didn't look at him. My eyes scanned the room, passing over the faces, familiar, mocking, sympathetic, indifferent. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. Dr. Vance, I have something to say. You could have heard a pin drop. I adjusted my glasses, my eyes behind the lenses as calm as a frozen pond. Thank you to the department for its many years of mentorship. I let the word hang in the air. As of today, I'm done with the grind. I'm going to coast, punch the clock at 5, and go enjoy my life. With that, I picked up my laptop and walked straight toward the exit, leaving a room full of stunned silence in my wake. Vance's face went from white to red to a deep, blotchy purple. He must have expected a shouting match. He never imagined I would deliver the biggest slap in the face in the calmest way possible. The meeting dissolved in a fog of shock and profound awkwardness. I stepped out of the conference room. The afternoon sun was bright, almost blinding. I squinted and let out a long, slow breath. Things were about to change. 02, I meant what I said. The clock hit 5 p.m., and the chime echoed softly through the ward. I closed the patient chart I was reviewing, took off the white coat I'd worn for what felt like a lifetime, folded it neatly, and placed it in my locker. Then, I grabbed my bag and walked to the time clock. Everyone in the department stared at me like I'd grown a second head. At Metro General's surgical department, leaving on time was the stuff of legends. Especially for me, Leo Forrest, the resident workaholic, the surgical machine. The lights in my office were usually the last ones to go out. Vance's office door was open. He sat at his desk, his eyes fixed on me, sharp and menacing, a silent warning. I ignored him. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A cheerful beep echoed in the quiet hall. Clock out successful. I turned, gave a slight nod in the direction of Vance's office, a parting gesture, and walked away under the weight of dozens of bewildered stares. I could already imagine the department's group chat blowing up. Sure enough, the moment the elevator doors closed, my phone started vibrating nonstop. I opened the Gen SURG Elites Slack channel. It was chaos. Vance's top crony, Dr. Kyle Burton, was the first to attack. At channel, some people get a little bonus, their feelings get hurt, and they start throwing a tantrum. So unprofessional. No sense of the bigger picture. He didn't use my name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. A few others immediately chimed in. Exactly. Dr. Vance explained it perfectly. It's about composite contribution. If you're not a team player, who's to blame? All he does is surgery, day in and day out. He's like a robot. Never comes to department mixers. Of course his team score is low. He's lucky he got $2 for 100. If it were up to me, he'd have gotten 0. The comments were a barrage of insults. In the past, I might have been furious, might have tried to defend myself. But now, watching these clowns perform, I felt nothing but a detached amusement. A private message from Chloe, the resident, popped up. It was a string of angry emojis. Dr. Forrest, they're being such jerks. They're a bunch of thieves. Don't get mad. I'm going to set them straight. I smiled and typed a quick reply. Don't bother. Just watch the show. After sending the message, I closed the app. The world went quiet again. Meanwhile, back in Vance's office, I could picture the scene. He'd be pacing, furious, cursing my name, ungrateful, arrogant, thinks he's irreplaceable. Finally, he'd make a grand declaration. The world keeps spinning without him. We'll see if the Department of General Surgery shuts down just because Leo Forrest is gone. Then, he'd immediately call his most trusted lackey, Kyle Burton, into his office. With a grave, self-important tone, he'd entrust him with a full slate of surgeries I had been scheduled to perform. And Burton, desperate to please, would puff out his chest and promise to handle everything, all while a cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. Because he knew the next case on my schedule for that evening was a Whipple procedure, a pancreatic adenectomy. It's one of the most complex and dangerous operations in general surgery, the Mount Everest of the abdomen. And in the entire department, I was the only one who dared to do it solo. But that wasn't my problem anymore. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the sofa. For the first time in years, I was home before the sun had set. The air was still and quiet, filled with floating dust motes. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the hardwood floor. A wave of relief washed over me, a feeling I hadn't realized I was missing. I drew a hot bath and soaked for a solid 30 minutes, feeling the years of accumulated fatigue melt away with the steam. Afterward, I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. It was empty except for a few bottles of sparkling water. I laughed, shook my head, and threw on a jacket. I walked to the grocery store down the street, bought fresh vegetables, a thick-cut ribeye, and a bottle of Cabernet. I cooked myself a real dinner. The steak, medium rare, paired with the wine, was perfect. As I ate, I idly scrolled through my phone. The character assassination in the group chat was still in full swing. They probably thought I was hiding in a corner somewhere, licking my wounds. I smirked, exited the chat, and turned my phone off completely. Then, I fired up the projector and put on a sci-fi movie I'd been meaning to watch for months. The giant screen, the booming sound system. I lost myself in the story. This was living. Sometime later, the movie ended. I felt a pleasant drowsiness and, after a quick rinse, fell into bed. I was asleep almost instantly. In the dead of night, a shrill ringing jolted me awake. It was the landline on my nightstand, a number only the hospital operator and the department had. I squinted at the caller ID. The department's emergency line. A cold, thin smile spread across my face in the darkness. I reached over and unplugged the phone line from the wall. The world fell silent once more. I rolled over and went back to sleep. But at that very moment, in an operating room at Metro General, all hell was breaking loose. Under the blinding glare of the surgical lights, Kyle Burton was drenched in sweat, his face as white as a sheet. The patient's abdomen was wide open, and blood was pouring out like water from a broken faucet. Clamps, gauze, suction, faster. Burton's voice was shrill, laced with a panic he couldn't hide. He couldn't find the source of the bleed. On the monitor, the patient's blood pressure was plummeting, their heart rate becoming erratic. Beep, beep, beep. The piercing alarm was like a hammer blow to everyone's chest. They had screwed up. Big time. 03 The atmosphere in the OR was so thick with tension, you could practically taste the metal. Warren Vance and Kyle Burton stood over the patient, their scrubs soaked through with sweat. The harsh surgical lights illuminated their grim faces. Nothing they did could stop the bleeding. The patient's vitals were crashing, each drop on the monitor a countdown to disaster. The head nurse, a veteran of countless crises, was frantic. "Dr. Vance, this isn't working. The patient is crashing. The bleeder is too deep. Only Dr. Forrest can handle this. Forrest. Forrest. Always Forrest." Vance screamed internally, his face a stoic mask. He stared at the surgical field as if he could will the bleeding to stop with his eyes. It didn't work. "Chief, you have to call Dr. Forrest. We're running out of time," the anesthesiologist pleaded. Vance clenched his jaw. He knew he had no choice. He pulled out his cell phone, his fingers trembling as he found my number and hit dial. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." The robotic voice was like a bucket of ice water dumped over his head. "Turn off." He dared to turn his phone off. Vance nearly threw his phone against the wall. He tried the department landline, only to be met with a busy signal. He'd forgotten I'd unplugged it. "Useless. All of you are useless." Vance raged in the hallway outside the OR, tearing into Burton, who just stood there with his head down, accepting the abuse. In the end, Vance had to activate the hospital's emergency protocol, waking up every senior surgeon in the city for an emergency consult. A few of the old-timers arrived, looked at the mess Burton had made, and just shook their heads. After a grueling all-nighter, they finally managed to stop the bleeding and save the patient's life. But the surgery was a butcher job. What should have been a clean, precise procedure was now a massive, gaping wound, and the patient was left with severe complications. Morning came. I woke up naturally, feeling refreshed and clear-headed. I made myself breakfast and even went for a run in the park. At 8:30 a.m., I strolled into the office right on time. The department was in chaos. The hallway was packed with angry family members, their shouts and sobs echoing off the walls. A few junior residents were trapped in the middle of the crowd, looking pale and helpless. I paid them no mind, walked in my office, and started my new ritual. I filled my Yeti with hot water, adding a bag of chamomile tea. A calming aroma filled the small space. I leaned against the window, sipping my tea, and watched the pandemonium unfold below. Vance, with dark circles under his eyes like twin bruises, burst into my office. He looked like an enraged bull. "Leo," he bellowed, spittle flying from his mouth. I took a step back in disgust. He slammed his hand on my desk. "Why didn't you answer your phone last night? Why was it off? Do you have any sense of responsibility? Don't you care if patients live or die?" It was a classic Vance tirade, heavy on moral outrage. The old me would have been seething, but the new me just took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. It was warm and soothing. I set the mug down and finally looked at him. "Dr. Vance, I clocked out yesterday at 5 p.m. on the dot. According to hospital policy, my time after I clock out is my own. I'm a free man. As for my phone, the battery died. The landline must have a bad connection. These things happen." I looked at his face, twisted with fury, and continued. "Besides, my annual bonus is $2,400. That works out to $10 a surgery. You expect me to be on call 24/7 for that?" My voice was soft, but my final question landed like a punch. "Dr. Vance, does that sound reasonable to you?" "You." He was speechless. He pointed a trembling finger at me, unable to form a coherent sentence. He had never imagined that the quiet workhorse he'd taken for granted would use his own bureaucratic logic against him. After a long, sputtering pause, he finally managed a threat. "Fine, you want to be like that, Leo? Fine. I'm writing you up. I'm reporting you to the board. I'll have your salary docked." I shrugged, completely unfazed. "Go ahead. Can't dock what's barely there." With that, I turned back to my computer and started browsing a medical journal. I treated him like he was invisible. He stood there, his chest heaving, until he finally let out a frustrated roar, spun around, and slammed the door on his way out. The only sound left was the faint echo of his rage. I took another sip of tea. This chamomile was really good. 04 without me, The department was like a car with a missing engine, sputtering, rattling, and always on the verge of breaking down. The fallout from the botched surgery cost Vance a hefty settlement to quiet the family. But the official malpractice complaint was a permanent stain on the department's record. Then, another crisis arrived. A new patient was admitted with a massive abdominal aortic aneurysm. The aneurysm was dangerously close to the renal arteries, making surgery incredibly high risk. If it ruptured, the patient would bleed out and die in minutes. Vance called an emergency meeting with all the senior surgeons. They huddled around the CT scans, their faces grim. The aneurysm's huge, and the location is a nightmare. One slip while dissecting, and you could sever a renal artery. Blood pressure management during the procedure would be a tightrope walk. The risk is just too high. Isn't this the kind of surgery Dr. Forrest used to handle? Someone muttered. Every eye in the room shifted to Vance. His face flushed. He knew that I was the only surgeon in the entire hospital who could pull off this procedure with a success rate over 90%. But his ego wouldn't let him ask me for help. He gritted his teeth and turned to Kyle Burton. Dr. Burton, you're an experienced surgeon. You'll take the lead on this one. The color drained from Burton's face. His legs started to tremble. No, Chief, I can't. I really can't, he stammered, waving his hands frantically. My malpractice insurance is already through the roof from the last incident. I can't touch this. He wasn't about to risk his entire career on another high-stakes surgery he wasn't qualified for. Vance cursed him out, but Burton stood his ground. He wouldn't do it. Defeated, Vance chose the most cowardly option available, conservative management. Everyone knew conservative management was just a euphemism for waiting for the inevitable. The patient was a walking time bomb. A sense of dread settled over the department. Patients and their families aren't stupid. They can tell when a department is floundering. Word got out, and those with connections started requesting transfers to other hospitals. For the first time ever, beds in the general surgery ward were empty. Surgical volume plummeted. The department's monthly revenue, and by extension everyone's paycheck, was about to take a massive hit. The grumbling started, quiet first, then growing louder. But this time, the complaints weren't about me. They were about Vance and Burton. Chloe, acting as my personal intelligence agent, rushed to my office. Dr. Forrest, everyone's blaming Dr. Vance now. They're saying his incompetence is destroying the department. Some are even saying they shouldn't have ganged up on you. I was busy scrolling through TikToks on my phone. Without looking up, I said flatly, a little late for regrets. When the avalanche starts, it's too late for the pebbles to vote. Chloe nodded, though she didn't fully understand. Seeing that intimidation wasn't working, Vance tried a different tactic, flattery. At the next weekly meeting, he showered me with praise. Dr. Forrest, while his enthusiasm has been a bit low recently, his technical skill is undeniable, he announced to the room. I've decided to nominate him for this year's Employee of the Year award. Let's give him a round of applause. A few hesitant claps echoed in the awkward silence. The attempt at manipulation was painfully obvious. Everyone looked at me, waiting to see how I'd respond. I put down my phone, stood up, and gave Vance a polite smile. Thank you for the kind thought, Chief. But as I've said, I'm just here to coast and enjoy a better work-life balance. This Employee of the Year award should go to someone who truly wants it. I think Dr. Burton would be an excellent candidate. Burton's face turned the color of raw liver. Vance, publicly humiliated again, was speechless. Every tool in his arsenal, threats, bribery, flattery, was useless against me. Without his star surgeon, his department was grinding to a halt. Complaints and formal grievances were piling up. Hospital administration started calling him in for frequent and increasingly unpleasant meetings. The cushy position he'd schmoozed his way into was suddenly on shaky ground. He was trapped. And me? I was clocking in at 9 and out at 5, drinking my tea, reading articles, and living a life of profound and satisfying peace. I was a spectator in the front row, calmly watching the clown I worked for perform the final, frantic acts of his career. 05 that afternoon. The sky was a gloomy, oppressive gray. A black sedan with government plates ignored the authorized vehicle's only sign and pulled right up to the entrance of the surgical wing. I didn't recognize the specific plates, but you didn't have to be a genius to know the person inside was a major VIP. What happened next was even more telling. The hospital CEO, the COO, and a whole entourage of administrators practically sprinted out of the main building. Their faces were a mixture of anxiety and forced smiles as they lined up by the car door, looking like servants awaiting the arrival of a king. Every window in our department was crowded with curious faces. Whoa, who is that? The CEO himself is rolling out the red carpet. Those have to be state-level plates. The car door opened. A few serious-looking men in dark suits got out first, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Then, an elderly man with a full head of white hair was helped out of the car. He was pale, but his eyes were sharp, and he carried an air of quiet authority. He was rushed to the VIP suite on our floor. The entire department was instantly on high alert. The initial diagnosis came back like a thunderbolt, striking Vance right between the eyes. A massive pheochromocytoma, complicated by acute heart failure. It was an extremely rare and dangerous condition. The tumor unpredictably secretes massive amounts of adrenaline, causing wild swings in blood pressure. During surgery, the patient could easily suffer a hypertensive crisis, stroke, or heart attack. The mortality rate was over 70%. Every top specialist in the hospital was summoned for an emergency consultation. The conference room was filled with tension and cigarette smoke. The heads of neurosurgery, cardiology, and anesthesiology all stared at the CT scan and shook their heads. This is unbelievably tricky. The tumor is wrapped around the adrenal gland and the major surrounding blood vessels. There's no surgical window, and the patient's age and underlying heart failure mean he'd never survive the trauma of a major operation. Nobody in this hospital can do this surgery. The risk is astronomical. It's a death sentence for whoever tries. The conclusion was unanimous. Forgo surgery. Opt for palliative care. In other words, let him die. Vance stood off to the side, sweat soaking through his shirt. He knew the CEO would never accept that answer. And he was right. The CEO slammed his fist on the table. Palliative care? Do you have any idea who this gentleman is? If anything happens to him in our hospital, every single one of us is finished. The room fell silent. Suddenly, the head of cardiology slapped his thigh. Wait a minute. Leo Forrest. In general surgery. His doctoral thesis was on targeted therapy and surgical innovations for pheochromocytoma. That's right. He's published several papers on it in top national journals. He's one of the leading young experts in the field. In an instant, every head in the room turned to Vance. The only hope was me. The CEO strode over to Vance, his eyes like daggers. He leaned in close and hissed, "Warren, I don't care what you have to do. Beg, kneel, promise him the world. You will get Leo Forrest to perform this surgery. If Mr. Harrison has any complications, you can clear out your desk tomorrow." Vance's legs gave out, and he nearly collapsed. He knew, this time, he had truly and spectacularly screwed up. The patient was someone he and the entire hospital could not afford to fail. He stumbled out of the conference room and ran like a madman to my office. He threw open the door to find me calmly packing my bag. A small desk fan was pointed at my face, and a thermos of herbal tea sat on my desk. I was getting ready to leave for the day. Vance saw this, and his eyes went bloodshot. For the first time, he completely abandoned his arrogant, condescending demeanor. "Now, Dr. Forrest, please, we have an emergency surgery." I ignored him. I slowly shut down my computer, tidied my desk, and picked up my jacket. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The hands had just aligned perfectly. 5 p.m. I turned to face the desperate man blocking my exit and gave him a bright, cheerful smile. I pointed to the clock. "Dr. Vance, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going home." Panic flooded Vance's face. He physically blocked the doorway, his large body trembling with fear. "Dr. Forrest, now, I'm begging you. Please, you have to do this. We're all screwed if you don't." 06 faced with Vance's desperate, almost pathetic pleading, I felt a calm resolve. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Dr. Vance, punching out on time and not causing trouble for the department. Those were your words, weren't they? At the meeting? You taught us all the importance of following the rules." I emphasized the word rules. The color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty white. My words were a scalpel, slicing straight through his hypocrisy. Just then, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. The CEO and a group of hospital administrators rushed over. Seeing the standoff at my door, the CEO immediately understood. He shot Vance a look of pure, unadulterated loathing, then turned to me, his expression instantly shifting to one of deep sincerity. "Dr. Forrest, I know you've been treated unfairly by this department," he began, his voice low and earnest. "On behalf of the hospital, I want to apologize. But this is a critical situation. The patient is an extremely important figure. I'm asking you, for the good of the hospital, please save this man's life." The CEO's apology was smooth and strategic. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. I knew this was my moment. "I'll do the surgery," I said. A collective sigh of relief went through the small crowd. Vance visibly sagged against the doorframe. But my next words made their hearts leap back into their throats. "On 3 conditions." The CEO's brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Name them." "First," I said, holding up one finger and looking directly at the pale-faced Vance, "I want the hospital to issue a formal, hospital-wide memo publicly reprimanding Dr. Vance for his gross misconduct in the allocation of performance bonuses. Furthermore, he will apologize to me, Leo Forrest, for the bonus incident in front of the entire general surgery department." Vance swayed on his feet. A public apology, broadcast to the entire hospital? That was worse than being fired. The CEO didn't hesitate. "Done," he snapped. He then glared at Vance. "You heard him, Warren. Apologize. Now." Vance stood there, his face turning a deep, mottled purple. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His precious pride was being publicly dismantled, piece by piece. "Now," the CEO barked. The pressure was too much. Vance finally broke. He looked at me, his head bowed in defeat, and squeezed out the words through gritted teeth. "Dr. Forrest, I am sorry. I was wrong." The hallway was silent. Everyone was stunned. I nodded once. Apology accepted. I held up a second finger. "Second, the hospital's compliance and finance departments will immediately form a joint task force to audit the last 3 years of the general surgery department's finances and bonus allocations. Every discrepancy will be corrected, and every dollar owed to the frontline staff will be repaid in full." This condition was a direct shot at Vance and his entire network of cronies. The CEO's eyes narrowed. He gave me a long, hard look, then nodded again. "Consider it done. I'll personally oversee it." "Third," I said, holding up my last finger, "for this surgery, I require complete autonomy. I will select my own team, I will determine the surgical plan, and there will be no administrative interference in my medical decisions." As I spoke, my eyes flickered toward Kyle Burton, who was hovering in the background. He flinched and avoided my gaze. "Of course," the CEO agreed instantly. "You're the lead surgeon, and that, or your word is law." My conditions were met. I nodded, wasting no more time. "Prep the or." I turned and walked toward the locker room. "Chloe," I called over my shoulder, "you're my first assist." Chloe, who had been watching in wide-eyed silence, jumped. A look of pure joy and determination spread across her face. "Yes, Dr. Forrest," she replied, her voice ringing with excitement. I changed into my scrubs, put on my mask and cap, leaving only my eyes visible. When I walked out of that locker room, I was a different person. The laid-back, coasting Leo Forrest was gone. In his place stood the surgeon they called the Golden Hands, calm, focused, and in absolute control. I was back. 07, the ore lights hummed to life, bathing the room in a shadowless, clinical white. The air, cold and sterile, smelled of antiseptic. I stood at the head of the table, my eyes fixed on the array of monitors displaying the patient's vitals. My mind was already running through the entire procedure, step by step. BP 180 over 110, heart rate 130. Push phentolamine now. My voice was calm and clear, carrying an authority that no one questioned. The anesthesiologist complied immediately. Across from me, Chloe stood ready as my first assist. Her face was a mask of nervous excitement, her hand trembling slightly as she held the needle driver. This was the biggest surgery of her residency, a trial by fire. I glanced at her, my voice softening just a fraction. Relax. Just follow my lead. Do what you've been trained to do. Chloe took a deep breath and nodded, her eyes hardening with focus. Burton and the rest of Vance's cronies were relegated to the corners of the room, spectators. They weren't even qualified to hold retractors in my or. Their expressions were a sour mix of resentment and humiliation. Scalpel. The cool metal slapped into my gloved hand. The surgery had begun. Incision, dissection, entry into the abdominal cavity. Every movement was precise, economical, and confident. The massive tumor soon came into view. It was a grotesque, vascular monster, fused to the aorta and renal arteries, even worse than the scans had suggested. A collective gasp went through the observers. An adhesion that severe meant a single wrong move would rupture a major vessel, and the patient would be dead in seconds. Aortic clamps on standby. Control renal blood flow. I gave the order as I began the most critical part of the operation, separating the tumor from the blood vessels. My fingers were steady, the dissector an extension of my will. I worked in the millimeter-wide space between the tumor and the artery wall, a deadly dance of precision. Time seemed to slow. The only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor and the quiet clink of surgical instruments. Suddenly, a high-pitched alarm shrieked through the room. Blood pressures dropping. 60/30. Heart rates down to 40. Crisis. The manipulation of the tumor had triggered a massive hormonal dump, causing the patient's system to go into shock. Chloe's face went white. Dr. Forrest. Stay calm, I said, my voice sharp but steady, my hands never faltering. Push 1 milligram of epinephrine 4. And get the blood bank on the line. I want packed red cells now. My confidence was a lifeline, pulling everyone back from the edge of panic. Chloe, look here, I said, continuing to operate while I taught. This is the tumor's main feeding artery. Find it, ligate it, and the pressure will stabilize. This was no longer just a surgery. It was a masterclass in crisis management. While everyone else's heart was pounding, mine was steady as a rock. My focus narrowed until the only thing in the world was the battlefield in front of me. After 8 grueling hours, the massive tumor was finally free. I placed it in the surgical tray with a heavy thud. A collective sigh of relief washed over the room. Surgery was successful, I announced, straightening my aching back. It was the middle of the night when I finally walked out of the OR. The CEO, Mr. Harrison's family, and a crowd of administrators were waiting anxiously. They swarmed me as soon as I appeared. Doctor, how is he? I pulled down my mask, my face weary and slick with sweat. I gave a simple nod. The surgery went well. We got the whole tumor. The hallway erupted in applause. The CEO shook my hand, thanking me profusely. Mr. Harrison's son, a man who radiated quiet power, walked up and gave me the deep, respectful bow. I said little, delegating the post-op handover to Chloe, and walked back to the locker room. As I peeled off the heavy lead apron and scrubs, a wave of exhaustion hit me. But beneath it, I felt a profound sense of peace. With a scalpel, I had not only saved a life, but I had also carved a new path for myself. 08 Mr. Harrison's recovery was remarkably swift. Within days, he was walking the halls, his color returning. He was extremely pleased with the outcome, and after hearing the details of the harrowing 8-hour procedure, he was full of praise for my skill. One morning after my rounds, Mr. Harrison's assistant stopped me. Dr. Forrest, Mr. Harrison would like to have a private word with you. Surprised, I followed him into the secure VIP suite. Mr. Harrison was sitting up in bed, reading. He smiled when I entered. Leo, come in, sit down. His tone was warm and grandfatherly, devoid of any pretense. We talked for a while about his recovery. Then his tone shifted. Leo, he said casually, I hear there was a bit of situation in your department before I arrived. Something about the star surgeon being ready to walk out. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. At first, I was hesitant, giving vague answers about burnout and needing a break. I didn't know who this man really was or what his intentions were. Mr. Harrison just smiled, his eyes seeing right through me. Son, you don't need to be so guarded with me, he said gently. I've been around a long time. I can see you're a man of great skill and integrity, but you're also carrying a lot of resentment. For a surgeon like you to be pushed to the breaking point, the problem in this department must run deep. His perception was uncanny. He didn't press me further. Instead, he reached into his nightstand, pulled out a small red booklet, and handed it to me. I opened it. My eyes widened. State Health System, Office of the Inspector General. My pulse quickened. Mr. Harrison took the credentials back. "Retired now," he said with a chuckle. "I was just here for a quiet checkup, and, at the request of an old friend, to do a little informal review of how things are run at the ground level." I didn't expect to become a patient myself. I understood immediately. The opportunity one had been waiting for had just fallen into my lap. I sat up straighter and looked him in the eye. All my hesitation vanished. "Sir, you're right. The problems in my department are systemic and have been festering for years." For the next 30 minutes, I laid everything bare. Vance's incompetence, his cronyism, the way he suppressed skilled doctors, and the corrupt bonus system he had created. I didn't embellish. I just stated the facts. But the facts alone were damning. To back up my claims, I opened a secure folder on my phone. It contained evidence I had been quietly collecting for months. Surgical logs showing Vance and Burton's names on complex procedures they never participated in. Staffing schedules that consistently gave his favorites the easiest shifts. And procurement documents for medical supplies from a company owned by Vance's brother-in-law at prices well above market value. It was a complete, undeniable chain of evidence. As Mr. Harrison listened and read, the smile faded from his face, replaced by a look of grim seriousness. When I was finished, he let out a long sigh. "This is an absolute disgrace," he said, his voice low and angry. He slammed his hand on the bed. "I had no idea the rot went this deep. This isn't just mismanagement. This is a betrayal of the public trust. He's gambling with patients' lives to line his own pockets." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and admiration. "Leo, you are a good man. You have skill, integrity, and a conscience. What was done to you cannot be ignored. And this cancer in our healthcare system must be cut out." He stood up and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Rest assured," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "I'm going to take care of this." Looking into his determined eyes, I knew. Warren Vance's reign was over. 09, the very next morning, the hospital was shaken to its core. An official directive from the State Health Commission arrived by special courier. The document was brief and to the point. A joint task force was being established to conduct a full administrative and financial audit of Metropolitan General's Department of General Surgery, effective immediately. The task force was a powerhouse, comprising officials from the State Inspector General's office, the Health Commission, and the State Auditing Bureau. When Vance heard the news, he was in his office sipping tea. The cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He collapsed in his chair, pale and trembling. He knew this was Mr. Harrison's doing. He was finished. He desperately started making calls to his network of contacts, the people he thought would protect him. But his calls went unanswered, or he was met with a cold, "I don't know you." He started shredding documents, trying to destroy any evidence. It was too late. The task force moved with lightning speed. Their first act was to seal all of the department's financial and administrative records. And the first person they called in for an interview was me. In a quiet conference room, I handed over all the evidence I had collected. The second person they interviewed was Chloe, the young resident. Though nervous, bravely corroborated what she had witnessed. With our testimonies as a starting point, the investigation snowballed. One by one, other doctors and nurses were called in. Freed from Vance's tyranny, the floodgates opened. Years of suppressed resentment and anger poured out. Stories of abuse, stolen bonuses, and unfair treatment. The final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected source. Vance's most loyal lieutenant, Kyle Burton, cracked under questioning in less than an hour. To save himself, he turned state's evidence, spilling every secret he knew and even revealing kickback schemes involving pharmaceutical reps and medical device companies that the investigators hadn't even known about. Vance was utterly alone. He tried to approach my office one last time, hoping to beg me to intervene with Mr. Harrison on his behalf. I had Chloe send him away. "Dr. Forrest is busy." For days, a cloud of fear and anticipation hung over the department. Vance remained holed up in his office, a caged animal awaiting his fate. The rest of the staff quickly figured out which way the wind was blowing. They started greeting me with respectful smiles, calling me Dr. Forrest with a newfound sincerity. I ignored these fair-weather friends, keeping my distance. I continued my new routine, clocking in and out on time, drinking my tea, and visiting Mr. Harrison to monitor his recovery. I was the calm eye of the storm. I had watched him build his corrupt empire. Now I was on watch it burn. The investigation concluded with shocking speed. The evidence against Vance was irrefutable. He had illegally embezzled millions in department funds through the rigged bonus system. Worse, the task force had uncovered a massive bribery scheme involving medical equipment suppliers. Several of his cronies, including Burton, faced severe disciplinary action and financial penalties. A week later, a hospital-wide staff meeting was called. It was held in the same conference room where I had been publicly humiliated. This time, however, the CEO and the head of the state task force stood at the podium. Vance sat in the front row, a broken man awaiting his sentence. The task force leader read the final decision aloud. Following a thorough investigation, Dr. Warren Vance, former head of general surgery, has been found guilty of gross violation of professional conduct, embezzlement, and accepting bribes. He is hereby stripped of all positions and titles at Metropolitan General Hospital. His medical license is revoked, and his case has been referred to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. As he finished, two plainclothes detectives entered the room and stood behind Vance. Warren Vance, you're coming with us. Vance went limp, a hollowed-out shell of a man. They had to half-drag him from his chair. As they escorted him out, he glanced toward my office. I was sitting by the window, sipping my tea, the morning sun warming my face. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. His were filled with a toxic cocktail of regret, hatred, and disbelief. Then he was gone. The sordid drama he had authored had finally reached its pathetic conclusion. At the meeting, the CEO also announced the immediate repeal of the old bonus system. Furthermore, the hospital would use its own funds to conduct a full recalculation of the last 3 years of bonuses and issue back pay to every affected staff member. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Later that day, I received a text alert from my bank. Chase Bank, a direct deposit of $1,865,000 was made to your checking account. Over $8 million. The money I had earned with my blood, sweat, and skill over the past 3 years. Chloe, peeking over my shoulder, saw the number and shrieked with joy, grabbing my arm and jumping up and down. She was more excited than if she had gotten the money herself. Dr. Forrest, look, they paid you. They paid you everything. I looked at the long string of numbers on my phone screen, but my expression didn't change. I just lifted my tea, blew gently on the surface, and took a sip. It had never been about the money. It was about justice. With Vance gone and his cronies demoted or fired, a power vacuum opened up at the head of the general surgery department. The position of chief was empty. Everyone in the hospital was wondering who would fill it. The hospital administration, after careful deliberation, decided to hold an open election for the position rather than simply appointing someone. The message was clear. The job was mine for the taking. My skill, my reputation, and my role in exposing the corruption made me the only logical choice. The CEO met with me several times, earnestly asking me to take on the responsibility and lead the department into a new era. To everyone's shock, I turned him down. I appreciate the confidence, I told him, but I just want to be a surgeon. I want to treat patients and operate. The administrative side of things. It's not for me. I don't want the headache. My refusal was genuine. After witnessing Vance's ugly lust for power, I had developed a deep-seated aversion to it. I was afraid that if I sat in that chair for too long, I might become the very thing I despised. Just as I had resolved to remain a simple surgeon, Mr. Harrison, on the day of his discharge, asked to speak with me one last time. He was dressed in a sharp suit, looking vibrant and healthy. We sat on a bench in the hospital garden. He shared stories of his early days as a public servant, working in difficult and often thankless conditions. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes full of wisdom. Leo, I know what you're afraid of. You're disgusted by the politics, by the corruption, and you want to stay as far away from it as possible. But have you ever considered that power itself is neutral? It's like a scalpel. In a surgeon's hand, it saves lives. In a criminal's hand, it takes them, He paused, his gaze intensifying. When good people refuse to hold power, it falls into the hands of men like Warren Vance. He sat in that chair and poisoned the entire department, hurting good doctors like you. Only by taking that position yourself, by gaining the power to set the rules, can you protect the people who do the real work. Only then can you build the kind of fair and just environment you want to see. Running away from responsibility doesn't solve the problem, son. Sometimes you have to be the one to carry the weight. Mr. Harrison's words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He was right. If I stepped aside, what was to stop the next Warren Vance from taking over? My fight would have been for nothing. I had driven out one parasite, but I hadn't done anything to ensure more wouldn't return. In that moment, everything became clear. At the public election for the new chief of general surgery, I took the stage. I didn't give a speech full of empty promises or grand visions. I simply presented a detailed proposal for a new performance and compensation model I had been designing. The core principle was simple, a return to merit. The system was based entirely on surgical workload, case difficulty, technical innovation, and patient outcomes. All the subjective, political metrics like team contribution and interpersonal skills were gone. You work hard, you get paid. You excel, you get rewarded. My proposal was straightforward, transparent, and it spoke directly to the heart of every doctor and nurse in the room. When I finished, the applause was deafening, 100 times more sincere and passionate than any ovation Vance had ever received. The result was a foregone conclusion. I was elected as the new interim chief of the Department of General Surgery by unanimous vote. It was a position that followed hospital protocol for promotion while also reflecting the will of the people. 1.